Selanjutnya Bapak Ibu kita akan mendengarkan sambutan resmi dari Bapak Ketua Persetia kepada Pak Yusak. Dipersilahkan, mari Bapak.
Terima kasih Ibu Lenta, Ibu Dilak, yang kami sangat kasihi. Dan juga selamat datang dan selamat pagi Ibu Bapak dari yang tersebar di seluruh Indonesia dari Merauke sampai Sabang. Dan berasal dari sekolah-sekolah anggota Persetia dan juga rekan-rekan lain yang bergabung. Ada juga rekan-rekan yang berasal dari Sabah yang adalah juga anggota Persetia, associate member dari Persetia. Selamat datang semua Ibu Bapak. Kami sangat-sangat terharu dan senang bisa berjumpa kembali di ruang virtual ini di dalam program Persetia yang sangat penting, yaitu Studi Institut. Juga kami mengucapkan terima kasih untuk pembicara narasumber yang kita datangkan dari Vanderbilt University, Profesor Kwok Pui Lan, yang nanti akan bergabung dengan kita, juga Profesor Musdah Mulia, kemudian juga Ibu Pendeta Elga Sarapung, yang akan hadir di tengah-tengah kita dan memperkaya kita semuanya dengan topik yang akan kita bahas, perempuan, radikalisme, dan peacebuilding. Kita juga akan mendengarkan berbagai macam presentasi yang berkaitan dengan gerakan perempuan untuk perdamaian dari Ibu Robi Kofifah, Ibu Lian Gogali, dan Ibu Pendeta Kristi. Jadi semuanya didominasi oleh perempuan. Ini adalah abad perempuan. Ini adalah zaman perempuan. Karena itu Persetia amat sangat concern dengan teolog-teolog perempuan, pemikiran-pemikiran, dan bagaimana pemikiran tersebut bisa dipakai untuk memberi kontribusi bagi masyarakat, negara, dan bangsa kita. Kita juga akan mendengarkan presentasi dari wakil-wakil dari sinode yang hampir sebagian besar juga perempuan, dari Ibu Pendeta Dr. Linja Pelu, kemudian Pendeta Nova Theodora Suru, kemudian dari Pendeta Jenny Eliani Keriak, dan Pendeta Emi Ratnawati Yunita. Semuanya perempuan. Ditambah nanti dengan presentasi dari sekolah-sekolah anggota, Pendeta Marudur Siahaan, ini juga perempuan, Diakones Dr. Eleven Sihotang, juga perempuan, lalu ada Pendeta Soliska Galustri J. Tori, ini juga perempuan, dan Pendeta Dr. Tony Tampake, ini juga perempuan. Sorry ya, ini satu-satunya laki-laki yang berperanan juga. Jadi kita perlu juga mendengar suara laki-laki sedikit saja, yaitu Pendeta Tony Tampake, dan kita akan mendengarkan dari Ibu Pendeta Elizabeth Mesdila, orang dari Sabah, dari Luther Seminari Sabah, tetapi originalnya adalah Indonesia. Jadi ini termasuk orang Sabah KW ya. Ibu Elizabeth Mesdila ini orang Sabah KW, tapi orinya Indonesia. Dan project officer-nya juga perempuan. Jadi semuanya, hampir semuanya perempuan. Ini adalah abad perempuan, Ibu Bapak. Ibu Bapak yang saya hormati, kita mengucap syukur karena di tengah-tengah berbagai macam persoalan pandemi COVID-19, kita masih mempunyai belajar bersama di dalam kegiatan-kegiatan Persetia. Walaupun kita tidak bisa berjumpa muka dengan muka secara fisik, tetapi kita masih ada sekitar 122 peserta di dalam studi institut ini. Ini adalah hal yang sangat amat menggembirakan. Ibu Bapak, sejak dari awal, Persetia adalah lembaga milik kita bersama untuk memajukan teologi kontekstual di Indonesia. dan itu meliputi berbagai macam aras dan ranah. Sebelum Mas Menteri Pendidikan, Kebudayaan Nasional dan Ristek menggemakan semboyan Merdeka Belajar Kampus Merdeka, Persetia telah melakukan itu sejak dari awal terbentuknya Persetia. Oleh sebab itu, apa yang dikemukakan oleh Mas Menteri Pendidikan dan Kebudayaan Nasional itu sejalan dengan salah satu visi dari Persetia untuk aras S1, untuk studi institut, itu untuk belajar bersama untuk aras dosen-dosen. Kita saling belajar dari dosen-dosen lain, lintas perguruan tinggi, sambil juga mendengarkan dari narasumber, belajar dari mereka. Itu untuk dosen-dosen. Untuk S1, kita mempunyai konferensi mahasiswa nasional KMNTI. Itu aras S1. Setiap mahasiswa belajar satu sama lain di dalam kegiatan itu. Untuk mahasiswa masa pasca sarjana yang selama ini didominasi oleh mahasiswa program magister, kita mempunyai summer school yang kita rancang dalam bahasa Inggris, kita sesuaikan juga masih tetap ada kelas bahasa Indonesianya. Kita sedang memikirkan bahwa summer school tidak hanya untuk mahasiswa S2, tapi juga sangat besar kemungkinan mahasiswa S3 juga bisa terlibat. Untuk pustakawan-pustakawati, kita telah mempunyai kegiatan yang terus-menerus secara kontinu yang berkaitan dengan kegiatan-kegiatan perpustakaan untuk sekolah-sekolah. Jadi mohon doa, mohon dukungannya. Juga Dian ada di sini juga, kita support Dian. Kami pengurus sangat khawatir dengan situasi kedua rekan kita, Ibu Lenta dan Ibu Dian. Kita dukung dalam doa, tapi juga dukung dalam memberikan nutrisi, makanan yang banyak.
Ada laptop.
Kemudian juga jangan lupa minum vitamin. Pokoknya makan yang sebanyak-banyaknya. Karena kita masih tetap mempunyai satu hal di tengah-tengah situasi ini, yaitu pengharapan. Bahwa Tuhan tetap beserta kita dalam situasi yang paling berat sekalipun, dan jangan sampai virus ini mengalahkan kita. Ayo kita kalahkan beramai-ramai gitu. Dengan hati yang semangat, yang gembira, dan karena itu Ibu Lenta dan Ibu Dian perlu cukup banyak istirahat. Kalau ada waktu istirahat, tidurlah. Kalau ada waktu kesempatan, istirahatlah. Biar Ibu Dona dan Ibu Asnat yang mengawal kegiatan SI ini dari awal sampai akhir. Saya pikir ikan cepat, ikan gabus, tidak perlu ikan lele. Makin cepat, makin bagus, tidak perlu bertele-tele. Sambutannya saja, dan untuk itu, atas nama pengurus Persetia, dalam nama Allah, Bapa, Putra, dan Roh Kudus, dengan ini secara resmi membuka kegiatan Persetia Studi Institut tahun 2021. Terima kasih. Selamat menikmati.
Mantap visinya.
Ibu Lenta, silakan.
Bapak Ketua, terima kasih. Terima kasih untuk semua Bapak Ibu yang sudah japri saya. Saya baik-baik aja. Ya, karena nggak mungkin saya tidur sekarang ya. Pak Ketua bilang boleh tidur, tapi jangan sekarang. Karena masih studi institut.
Makin cantik kau, Lenta.
Bujur Bapak. Itu meningkatkan imun juga ya.
Iyalah.
Baiklah. Kita lanjutkan Bapak Ibu. Kita akan mendengarkan pengantar umum dari Project Officer yang akan dibawakan oleh Ibu Asnat. Silakan Ibu.
Ya, selamat pagi Bapak Ibu semua. Selamat pagi Pak Ketua.
Selamat pagi Bu Asnat.
Selamat
pagi Bu.
Selamat ketemu lagi bagi yang sudah pernah ketemu dan yang baru. Selamat ketemu dan berkenalan. Ya, seperti yang Pak Ketua tadi sudah katakan bahwa program studi Institut ini sudah berlangsung lama, itu sudah dari tahun 1973. Jadi ini untuk dosen-dosen dari sekolah-sekolah anggota Persetia, bagaimana kita berbagi pengalaman, berbagi informasi, pengetahuan, mengingat sekolah-sekolah anggota ini kan beda konteksnya ya, juga beda apanya, ada yang di kota, ada yang di desa, jadi kita bisa saling melengkapi untuk pengetahuan kita, membekali kita dalam bidang studi kita masing-masing gitu, atau mata kuliah yang kita ampuh. Nah, untuk tema kali ini berdasarkan ruah tahun 2018 yang lalu, itu disepakati untuk temanya perempuan, radikalisme, dan peacebuilding. Ya. Nah, ini tentunya didorong oleh keprihatinan dalam kehidupan antar beragama di dalam masyarakat. Kita bisa saksikan sendiri bahwa seringkali timbul gesekan-gesekan antara pemeluk yang agama yang satu dengan pemeluk agama yang lain, ya karena perbedaan pandangan, perbedaan ideologi, perbedaan keyakinan gitu. Nah, ini yang kadang tidak dilihat sebagai satu kekayaan di mana kita bisa saling berbagi, melengkapi, tapi justru dilihat sebagai ancaman gitu ya. Jadi kita bersaing satu dengan yang lain, tapi persaingan itu sesuatu yang buruk gitu ya, karena pada akhirnya sampai pada saling menjatuhkan, saling menghancurkan, ya memusuhi satu dengan yang lain. Lalu karena terancam oleh agama yang lain, penganut agama yang lain, orang lalu mengambil sikap radikal gitu ya, fanatik sekali, radikal, fundamental gitu ya, dan tidak mau bergaul dengan orang lain. Ya. Dan selalu hidup di dalam kecurigaan, baik yang mayoritas maupun yang minoritas sama-sama ketakutan gitu ya. Yang minoritas takut pada yang mayoritas, takut ditekan, ditindas. Yang mayoritas juga takut minoritas karena takut nanti umatnya diambil gitu ya. Jadi kita ini hidup di dalam ketakutan sebenarnya. Dan kehidupan dalam ketakutan itu sama sekali tidak menyebabkan damai sejahtera. Ya. Jadi sikap-sikap seperti ini menurut saya sih hampir ada di semua agama. Ya. Mencoba untuk semakin kuat di dalam agamanya tapi melihat orang lain sebagai ancaman. Yang kadang bentuknya saja yang berbeda, tetapi sebenarnya sikap radikal itu hampir ada di semua penganut agama. Nah, yang menyedihkan bahwa di dalam sikap radikalisme ini yang tidak jarang juga melahirkan kekerasan, itu juga melibatkan kaum perempuan. Ya, jadi perempuan itu kalau dulu mereka hanya mendukung suaminya, gitu ya, mendampingi suaminya, tapi sekarang ini mereka juga terlibat di dalam melakukan tindak kekerasan. Bahkan ada beberapa yang lalu menjadi pelaku bom bunuh diri. Ya, kita lihat dari tahun 2018, 19, 20 gitu. Bahkan perempuan-perempuan muda itu terlibat di dalam aksi kekerasan. Dan ini sangat menyedihkan. Kenapa? Karena selama ini kita berpikiran bahwa perempuan itu lemah lembut gitu ya. Perempuan ini kan dia melahirkan kehidupan, ya, melahirkan manusia. Tidak hanya melahirkan tapi juga memelihara kehidupan itu. Dan anti pada kekerasan. Tetapi ternyata dalam kenyataan perempuan banyak yang menjadi pelaku kekerasan, ya. Dan ini bisa jadi karena dipengaruhi oleh ajaran-ajaran agama misalnya, atau budaya patriarki, atau karena terlalu patuh pada suami sehingga disuruh apa saja mau tanpa protes, ya. Ini yang perlu kita perhatikan kembali, ya, bagaimana menjadi perempuan. Perempuan itu adalah pejuang kehidupan. Harusnya itu yang kita lakukan, bukan menghancurkan kehidupan. Ya, tentu ada alasan yang mendorong kenapa perempuan bisa seperti itu. Karena itu kita akan diskusikan bersama dalam studi institut ini, terutama juga melihat pada budaya patriarkinya. Faktor-faktor apa yang mendorong, kemudian bagaimana itu dicegah, bagaimana mendorong perempuan bukannya melahirkan kekerasan, tetapi menciptakan damai sejahtera. Ya. Karena perempuan itu ya seperti yang Ibu Rahel juga pernah tulis ya, perempuan itu adalah inisiator untuk menciptakan peacebuilding, ya, pendamaian dengan caranya masing-masing gitu ya, tidak harus melalui diskusi panjang lebar tapi dari aksi sehari-hari bisa menciptakan damai sejahtera. Nah, ini yang akan kita lihat dan saya berharap tema ini bisa nanti kita masukkan di dalam mata kuliah kita, ya, sesuai, bisa itu menjadi sub mata kuliah, pembahasan. Bisa juga kita buat satu mata kuliah khusus tentang feminis, lalu ini dimasukkan di dalamnya, ya, karena ini menurut saya hal yang penting dan betul-betul relevan dengan situasi kita saat ini. Ini karena pandemi aja nih agak reda gitu ya. Kalau pandemi lewat bisa kumat lagi tuh ya. Kumat lagi itu saling menggigit satu dengan yang lain, menghancurkan satu dengan yang lain. Dan ini sesuatu yang sangat penting untuk kita perhatikan dan kita perjuangkan. Karena ini juga bagian dari kekerasan. Nah, peserta hari ini ada 123 orang. Jadi nanti hari ini sampai dengan tanggal 23 ada banyak presentasi, baik narasumber kita, pemateri, maupun juga dari aktivis di lapangan, dari sekolah-sekolah, maupun juga dari gereja-gereja. Dan pada akhirnya kita masuk dalam kelompok diskusi untuk kemudian kita plenokan, ya, supaya kita tahu apa tindak lanjut selanjutnya yang bisa kita lakukan di sekolah kita masing-masing. Nah, Ibu Dirlak sudah siapkan souvenir, maksudnya hadiah untuk yang terlibat aktif dalam diskusi. Ya, saya nggak tahu apa bentuknya, rahasia kali ya. Pokoknya setiap pelatihan atau seminar adalah gitu ya. Yang
ada gimmicknya.
Iya, ada door prize-nya. Baik, itu saja dari saya Bapak Ibu. Selamat bergabung dan kita ikuti prosesnya dari awal sampai akhir. Bagi yang setia akan ada upahmu yang besar di surga. Terima kasih, saya kembalikan kepada Ibu Dirlak.
Nah, ini juga selama di Jogja jadi langsing terus, Pak.
Terima kasih Bu Asnat untuk pengantar umum. Jadi jangan khawatir Bapak Ibu, selalu ada hadiah-hadiah menarik. Tapi semua masih kejutan. Nanti kita akan kabarkan di hari terakhir supaya semuanya setia dari awal sampai akhir begitu ya. Dan tidak berlama-lama lagi, saya yakin Bapak Ibu menunggu sesi yang pertama ini. Profesor Kwok Pui Lan, I see her already join us. Good morning, Prof. Ari boleh di spot beliau.
Good evening,
good morning
there.
From Jakarta and good evening there.
Good evening,
okay,
Profesor Kwok Pui Lan. Good evening.
Profesor
So, Bapak dan Ibu, kita langsung masuk sesi yang pertama. Kwok Pui Lan is a Hong Kong-born feminist writer. Who is she will be deeper explained by Pak Yusak. So now, Pak Yusak, the floor is yours. Silakan, Pak.
Thank you, Ibu Lenta. And good evening there, Professor Kwok Pui Lan. And good morning from Indonesia. I'm Yusak Setyawan, President or Chief Person of Association for Theological Schools in Indonesia. And I'm pleased to be your moderator to regulate the conversation and your presentation for the college's people who are attending Studi Institute of Persetia. So we would like to organize this presentation. First, 50 minutes for your presentation. Please use this precious time of 50 minutes. And then 40 minutes, we will have a discussion for question and answering. So about 90 minutes, this presentation and this will be over. But before we continue our program, I would like to introduce Professor Kwok Pui Lan a little bit. So Professor Kwok Pui Lan is Dean's Professor of Systematic Theology. I think saya berbicara dalam bahasa Indonesia karena I'm sorry, Professor Kwok, I would like to use bahasa Indonesia to introduce your identity, to introduce yourself to our audience. Profesor Kwok Pui Lan adalah profesor dari Systematic Theology di Kendall School of Theology, Emory University di Amerika Serikat. Pada tahun 1989, beliau lulus dan mendapatkan Ph.D. dari Harvard University, dan kemudian mendapatkan Dr. Honoris Causa, Doktor Teologi tahun 2004 dari Kempen Theological University di Nederland, dan kemudian mendapatkan Doktor Honoris Causa lagi tahun 2011 dari Uppsala University, Sweden. Jadi Doktor Honoris Causanya ada 2. Moga-moga Ibu Bapak juga ada yang mempunyai Doktor Honoris Causa ya. Kalau nggak Doktor Honoris Causa, Doktor Hororis Causa. Itu adalah pendidikannya. Dan dia sampai sekarang, mulai tahun 2020, dia menjadi Dean Professor of Systematic Theology dan merupakan jabatan prestisius pada seminari atau fakultas-fakultas teologi di Amerika. Sebelumnya, dia adalah Distinguished Visiting Professor of Theology di Kendall School of Theology, Emory University juga. Mendapatkan begitu banyak awards, hampir setiap tahun mendapatkan awards, dan juga Profesor Kwok menulis begitu banyak buku dan juga menulis begitu banyak artikel yang tersebar di berbagai macam jurnal internasional. Sampai sekarang dia adalah member dari the American Academy of Religion dan pernah menjadi presiden tahun 2011. Lalu pernah menjadi wakil presiden dari American Academy of Religion. Dan kemudian dia juga merupakan co-founder and faculty advisor of Pacific Asian and North American Asian Women in Theology and Ministry sampai sekarang. Profesor Kwok lahir di Hong Kong, tetapi yang kemudian mengabdikan diri di dalam pendidikan tinggi teologi dan khususnya dalam kaitannya dengan postcolonial feminist theology. Dan kita akan sangat senang mendengarkan presentasi dari beliau. Profesor Kwok, 50 minutes for your presentation. Please.
Thank you very much for your very kind introduction. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
And I am
Good morning.
have this opportunity to join the Studi Institute of 2021. And I look forward to the questions and comments at the end of the presentation. I'm going to share a PowerPoint for my talk. So the title of my presentation is Women, Radicalism, and Peacebuilding. On May 2018, coordinated suicide bombings of 3 churches in Surabaya, Indonesia, killed 18 people. A family of 6, including 2 daughters, carried out the attacks. The day after this attack, a family of 5, including a child, piled on 2 motorcycles and blew themselves up at the police headquarters. The consecutive incidents marked the first time in Indonesia that suicide bombings were executed by women, and also the first time that they involved children. In March 2019, Solema, the wife of the terrorist group leader Abu Hamzah, detonated a bomb, killing herself and her 2-year-old child during a standoff with the police in Sibolga. According to government data, in 2018, there were 13 women involved in acts of terror, and the number has increased to 15 in 2019. These women not only supported radical movements, but they also carried out actions such as assembly bombs and suicide bombing. The discussion of women, radicalism, and peace building is very timely, for as people of faith, we want to find out why women participate in radicalism and how we can prevent this from happening and work for peace. I will approach the topic from a postcolonial perspective. Postcolonial theory has been introduced to the fields of biblical studies and theology since the mid-1990s. The prefix post can mean after, and postcolonial means the period after colonialism. But the prefix post denotes not only colonialism and its legacy. Following Alia Lumba, I have defined postcolonial imagination as a process of disengagement from the whole colonial syndrome, which takes many guises. A postcolonial approach to religion, conflict, and peace building scrutinizes the legacy and impact of colonialism and empire, employs a transnational lens to examine the relationship between the global and the local, and also include gender analysis to understand women as agents of social change. In this lecture, I will cover 4 topics. The first one, religion, conflict, and colonial legacy. The second one, developing counter-imperial imagination. The third one, women and peace-building effort. Last but not the least, women and radicalism. So I begin with part 1, religion, conflict, and colonial legacy. Religion contributes to national, racial, and ethnic and other conflicts in many parts of the world. There has a long and complex history, which can be traced back to the colonial time. Using the divide and rule strategy, colonial administration exacerbated religious rivalry and hardened cultural and religious boundaries in Asia. Let me give you 3 examples. The first one from India. While there has been a clear sense of differences between Hindu and Muslim communities before the British arrived, colonial officials heightened their awareness of religious boundaries and identities through mechanisms such as the first census of 1871 and the introduction of separate Hindu and Muslim electorates. I could not find the map of the census in 1871. But let me show you this census of 1941. After the census, you can see the Muslims majority, they are located in this part and this part of India. And you recall that after the independence, very soon, then these Muslim majority areas were separated from India. So this is the first example. Let me cite an example of Myanmar. During the British colonial rule, laborers from today's India and Bangladesh were brought to work in Myanmar. After independence in 1948, the government refused to accept the Rohingyas as members of the citizens. In 2017, government troops ransacked their villages and committed human rights abuses, such as mass killing, rape, and arson. As a result, 650,000 refugees across the border into Bangladesh, and 120,000 are internally displaced. What about Indonesia? Indonesia is a very diverse country in terms of ethnicities, religions, cultures, economic status, and regional differences. In the long history of Dutch colonialism, the Dutch expanded and maintained their hegemony by exploiting rivalry among native powers. Colonial rule has centered around Java, and special treatment was given to Ambon and Malahisa, where Westernization and Christianization turned these places into strong colonial footholds to aid colonial rule. The Dutch also implemented problematic policies towards ethnic and religious minorities, such as the Chinese, and created barriers for their assimilation into society. These policies impeded national integration and fostered suspicion and rivalry of different ethnic and religious groups. During anti-colonial struggles, nationalist movements fought not only for political independence, but also for cultural and religious autonomy and revival. You may recall Gandhi famously appealed to the Hindu tradition in leading his nonviolent civil disobedience movement against British rule. He found the message of ahimsa, non-injury, as important in the pursuit of nonviolent protest for social and political changes. In Egypt, Muslim Brotherhood was founded in 1928, and its leaders wanted to implement traditional Islamic Sharia law in all aspects of life. In 1979, the success of the Iranian Revolution led to the establishment of Islamic Republic under Ayatollah Khomeini. In the process of Islamization of the country, he abolished the divorce law, compelled women to wear veils, outlawed homosexuality, and imposed other restrictions on women and children's rights. In the 1980s, we saw the rise of Al-Qaeda, a multinational network of Islamic extremists and jihadists led by Osama bin Laden and other leaders. The group has mounted attacks on military and non-military targets in various countries. After September 11 bombings, the United States launched the War on Terror against Al-Qaeda and other religious extremists. Here you can see President Bush saying that we are winning the war on terror. Even 7,000 miles away, across oceans and continents, on mountaintops and caves, you will not escape the justice of this nation. The war on terror affects Asia in several ways. First, the whole Asia has been a theater of war. It started in the Middle East, that is, West Asia, with immediate consequences in South Asia and Southeast Asia. Korea was also labeled by President Bush as part of the axis of evil. Second, the war on terror accelerated militarization and arms race in the region. Third, in the name of national security, several countries in Asia have enacted laws that restricted or even violated human rights. As a result, the war on terror has caused suspicion, competition, and instability in the Asian region. The revival of indigenous cultural and religious traditions in anti-colonial nationalistic movements was a double-edged sword for women. On the one hand, the embrace of these indigenous traditions fostered national pride and rallied people to fight colonial aggression. On the other hand, many of these nationalistic movements served the interests of male national elites and reinforced patriarchal attitudes and female subordination. Even today, feminism is a problematic word in some Asian countries because it is ought be used as an excuse to deny Asian women of their equal rights and their demand for full participation in society. Feminist movements based on local contexts and histories. As we will see below, blind loyalty and submission to patriarchal religion have led some women to the dangerous road of radicalism. So part 2, developing counter-imperial imagination. Given the close relationship between religion, conflict, and colonialism, we have to develop counter-imperial theological to organize Christians so that together we will work for peace. Collective effort, because our minds have been so full of myths that impede the discussion of religion and peace building. So we first must demystify these myths. The first myth who taught at Harvard for many years. Huntington suggested the future wars and conflicts would not be fought because of ideological differences, but because of clashes of religiously based civilizations. He argued that future conflicts would be between Christian civilizations and Sunni and Islamic cultures. This should alarm us. As you can see, the Sunni cultures are here, and the Islamic civilizations here. And Asia has the majority of the Muslim population. Huntington's argument has been criticized as treating civilizations as homogeneous and bounded entities with no interactions and crossovers. Furthermore, he treats religion as a monolithic, ahistorical, and unchanging essence. As such, he offers a rather simplistic and over-determined views of religion and conflict in the post-Cold War era. Let me move on to myth number 2. The second myth equates secularism with progress and regards religion as irrational, absolutist, divisive, and incompatible with modernity. This secularist paradigm treats religion as either irrelevant to or problematic for social life in general, and for conflict resolution in particular. From a cross-cultural perspective, scholars who study non-Western societies have contested Western biases in belief in secularism. In Formation of the Secular, anthropologist Khalid Assad argues that the secular cannot be viewed as a successor to religion or be seen to be on the side of the rational. The secular has a multi-layered history in different cultures. Its history is different in the West from that of the Middle East. So the secularist paradigm creates problems for the practice of peacekeeping because it overemphasizes the roles of the nation states and economies and neglects the roles of religious symbols, actors, and organizations in the context of peacekeeping. It also overlooks the fact that religious and secular organizations can collaborate and form alliances to further peace. Now I come to the third myth, which is very dangerous, because it suggests some religions, such as Buddhism or Christianity, are peaceful. But some, particularly Islam, are militant and condone violence and jihadism. This singular out of Islam is simplistic and ahistorical, for it overlooks the Crusades, Christianity's complicity in genocide and colonialism, and the internal rivalries within Christian traditions. It is also misleading and troubling and dangerous because it can lead to false stereotyping and scapegoating whole populations. The actions of Islamic extremists should not be generalized to represent Muslims, who make up roughly 1/4 of the world's population. The association of Islam with religious violence and the language of religious insurgents as a security threat display both Eurocentrism and Christian centrism, in addition to a strong Orientalist bias. Now, after debunking these three myths, we need to develop new awareness about the ways religion has been studied and how concepts such as world religions have been deployed. Different world religions were seen as incompatible, or they have been put into different boxes. Now, I cannot... Yes, forward. Maybe I will try to put up the PowerPoint. Yes, it works. So as you can see, when we study world religions, we put each religion in these boxes. Christianity in one box, Islam in another, and Jewish religion in another box, as if we have not learned from each other or borrowed from each other. Now let me share with you what happened in the Silk Road. The Silk Road joining Middle East all the way to China. And along the Silk Road, Buddhists, Muslims, and Christians intersected with one another for centuries. Christianity traveled along this Silk Road, meeting religious neighbors along the way and go all the way to China. Now in India, here, the Thomas religions, Christians, believe that St. Thomas has come to Kerala and died as a martyr there in the 1st century. The oldest surviving Thomas crosses dated back to the 8th century. And you can see you have a cross on top of the lotus symbol. Not only that, the cross is surrounded by this Quran, an ornamental archway known in Buddhist and Hindu temples. Obviously, you recognize the lotus symbol is a Buddhist symbol of purity in body, speech, and mind. And now in China, Syrian missionaries from the Church of the East arrived in China as early as the 7th century. And the Nestorian tablet, I'm just showing you the top of the tablet, has a cross too. Again, you can see the cross is on top of a lotus. These early developments of Christianity in India and China show that Christian message had to be translated into the vernacular and idioms. Given the long history of the interaction between diverse religious traditions in Asia, I want to discuss how women of different faiths can contribute to peace building. So I come to the third part of my presentation. So it is stuck again.
Don't worry.
Yeah.
Don't worry, Professor Kwok, because you have enough time, about 30 or 35 more minutes. So don't worry about that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let me see if I can do it this time.
Good. Bapak Ibu jangan khawatir, ini hal yang biasa terjadi di ruang Zoom karena kita memakai jaringan internet yang seringkali tidak stabil. So jangan khawatir, biasa saja. Walaupun jaringan internet tidak stabil, tapi cinta kasih saya pada Ibu Bapak tetap stabil.
Prof, if you need help, we can help you to share the screen if you want it.
Yeah, I am just trying. Sometimes, suddenly, it does not work. So I'm just trying to see if I can do it from my side. And I have also sent the video and hopefully, and the PowerPoint, and hopefully I can do it from my side. That will be easier.
Sambil menunggu Profesor Kwok, Ibu Bapak saya dorong untuk bisa memberikan respon, pertanyaan, komentar melalui ruang chatting. Itu cara yang sangat amat efektif. Walaupun demikian, nanti saya juga akan tetap membuka ruang diskusi secara langsung. It works. It works.
Hopefully.
Okay,
I am going to just leave it like this. That is in the middle. It looks like that if I do it like this, it might be easier because I can click it from this side, okay? So now I come to the third part, women and peace building effort. Now, inter-ethnic and inter-religious conflicts often result in rape, violence, war, and displacement, which disproportionately affect women and children. Therefore, women of all faiths, and men as well, must redouble our effort to work for peace, healing, and reconciliation. Women's scholars from different traditions have contributed to the discussion of inter-religious dialogue and learning. Here, I want to introduce my former colleague, Dr. Cheryl Kujawa-Holbrook's work. She has published some guidelines regarding inter-religious dialogue that I find very helpful. The first one is to recognize your tradition's participation in prejudice and oppression against people of other faith traditions. Inter-religious understanding and solidarity require each person and each faith community to develop an understanding about how they impact persons and faith communities from different religious traditions. Second, know the difference between religion, race, ethnicity, and culture. Religion is only one factor shaping social identities of people and intersects with other factors. Third, we have to challenge the myth that religions are the same. But of course, there are commonalities. We have to pay attention to the differences so that we will have genuine dialogue. The fourth one is to recognize multiple centers of truth, because legitimacy, which is determined by power dynamics in different contexts. And then we also need to know religious learning takes long-term commitment because it takes time to build up trust. Now I want to introduce the work of another Muslim scholar who is very well known and received awards in peacebuilding in California and other parts in the United States. This is Najiba Saeed, a lawyer and a Muslim scholar. She urges us to use an intersectional approach in inter-religious learning and says, interfaith or inter-religious education needs to take into consideration not only religious differences, but also differences in language, ethnicity, race, and various degrees of admission into the literal and figurative citizenry of this country. Inter-religious learning cannot stay at the abstract and intellectual level, but must involve the whole person. To cultivate understanding and empathy, we need to treat religion boundaries as porous instead of rigid, and recognize that there has been a long history of cross-fertilization and hybridity between traditions. She said, we need to move beyond polite, appreciative inquiry to attend to issues such as the harm done in the name of religion, the traumas of forging new religious identity because of migration, and the pain and alienation one feels in one's own tradition because of gender, sexuality, and political commitment. Many works on religion and peace building focus on the agency and leadership of male leaders. Let me introduce you to this book, Women, Religion, and Peace Building. It discusses the obstacles for women religious peace builders because of patriarchal practices, and they are often prevented from assuming authority in religious organizations and leadership in peace efforts. Many of you have heard about Jewish women's movement called Women in Black. So Women in Black movement organized silent vigils on Fridays in key sites in different cities while dressing in black to protest the occupation and the brutality of Israeli military. The movement has since spread to other parts of the world. In the Global South, I want to introduce to you to three leaders. The first one is Dekha Abraham Abdi of Kenya. She is a devout Muslim who worked as a consultant and trainer for peace building with many local and international organizations. She was a trustee of the Coalition for Peace in Africa and received several awards for her effort. In Asia, I want to introduce to you the Thai Buddhist nun, Mechi Sanchen Lee. Well, there was a conflict in southern part of Thailand between Buddhists and Muslims. She led a peace walk, and she was also involved in the Global Peace Initiative of Women and has traveled to different parts of the world promoting cultural understanding and peace. And I want to introduce to you Catholic sister Marie Bernard Alima of Congo. She formed a network called the Coordination of Women for Democracy and Peace to educate and train women to provide leadership in human rights, political movements, and efforts to prevent sexual and gender-based violence. These courageous women serve as examples and role models for us, showing that women can be change agents and bridge builders in peace building. I come to my last part, women and radicalism. As recent indices in Indonesia have shown, women have been recruited to join radical movements to carry out acts of violence. Therefore, we need to pay attention to the causes of women joining radical movements and address them. In 2019, 2 years ago, there were 149 suicide bombings in 24 countries, carried out by 236 suicide bombers, among them 22 women. Now, the number of suicide bombings has gone down following military defeats of ISIS. Even so, there are reasons to be concerned. First, 45% of suicide bombings occurred in Asian countries, many in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, and you can see in Sri Lanka, the Philippines, and Indonesia. There were 4 cases reported in Indonesia. Second, women no longer played supporting roles, but were directly involved in carrying out violent attacks and bombings. The Islamic State, connected to many of suicide bombings and other acts of violence, has networks in Indonesia, Malaysia. ISIS has been actively promoting women in jihad globally and recruiting women via the internet and other means. It is hoped that when women join terrorist organizations, they will mobilize their husbands and family members to join too. Women are assumed to be gentle and loving and less capable of violence than men. They are seen less suspicious or threatening by authorities. Women are better able to escape government surveillance if they do not belong to terrorist cells, but act alone or in small groups. Moreover, Muslim women's clothing can be used to hide explosives or bombs, and the police or security personnel may not body search them because of propriety. When women and children commit terrorist crimes, they tend to draw more attention from the media, which contributes to the jihadist cause. Now, why do Indonesian women and girls want to become suicide bombers and participate in extremist activities? In the past, some people thought that these women did not have their own free will. They were coerced or forced to do so by their husbands or male relatives. But now studies have shown that these women had greater self-agency and they joined terrorist activities for various reasons, prompted by a mix of personal crisis, socio-economic and political reasons, as well as religious seeking causes. In some cases, physical networks facilitate radicalization of the women. For example, the family of Puji Kuswati, who carried out the 2018 attacks on churches, had held weekly study sessions with other families in her house. In other cases, women are recruited to join terrorist organizations through the internet and the cyber propaganda. In some of these websites, female suicide bombers and combatants are glorified and praised. There were also cases in which Indonesians who worked as domestic helpers in Southeast Asia and Saudi Arabia were asked to contribute funds for terrorist activities and enticed to join terrorist networks, or even immigrate to Syria to join ISIS. Now, Indonesian women have played different roles in radicalism, such as disseminating online propaganda, helping with terrorist financing and networking, providing logistic supports, taking part in physical and weapon training, carrying out combat. Although ISIS ideology continues to emphasize that the role of women is in the home, it nevertheless permits women to undertake jihadi activities in exceptional situations, such as when men are not willing or able to do so. Participation in extremist networks also gives women a sense of agency and involvement. Radicalization of women and families leads to the tragic consequence that children are sometimes involved in a number of these violent attacks. In order to address the growing participation of women in radical movements, people of faith must work together across religious and ethnic differences for peace. I want to suggest 3 strategies. Number 1, interreligious dialogue and learning. According to a study by UN Women, there is a common offering in gendered extremist narratives and messaging in social media, which is the empowerment of women. Terrorist groups portray women as active and strong when assuming various roles in their networks. Therefore, interfaith groups must present gender-based counter-narratives to repudiate ISIS manipulated notions of what constitutes Muslim female empowerment. Indonesia has a long tradition of religiously based feminist movements. In the past, Indonesian Muslim women have participated in anti-colonial struggles, fought against polygamy and for marriage equality, and struggled against gender-based violence. Christians have also pushed for greater opportunities for women and decision-making in churches and society. In order to develop egalitarian and empowering views about women, we must challenge patriarchal elements and reclaim liberating traditions in our various religious traditions. Indonesian religious scholars and theologians have contributed to religious critiques and reconstruction of Islam and Christianity. Let me just briefly cite some examples. For example, Nazaruddin Umar has challenged a one-sided portrayal of the masculine dimension of the divine and in Islam. He has uncovered the feminine dimensions of the divine, drawing especially from the mystical tradition of Sufism. Another Indonesian scholar, Itin Awar, who currently teaches in the United States, has developed Islamic feminist theology based on the theology of creation. She argues that according to the creation network of Adam and Hawa, the men and women were created ontologically equal. Therefore, there is no justification for male domination over females. In Christianity, I want to recall the late Indonesian journalist and scholar, Marian Kaptopo, who was a pioneer in Asian feminist theology and wrote the first book in English in Asian feminist theology, Compassionate and Free in 1979. I had the honor and privilege of meeting Marian Captable several times. Now, she describes herself as the other in multi-religious Indonesia because of her gender and cultural experiences and her being a religious minority. She describes God as the absolute other, who is beyond human experiences, and cautions us not to commit the idolatry by glorifying our own power. Other Indonesian feminist scholars and theologians have also contributed to Christian feminist theology. That is why I encouraged Indonesian scholars and theologians to contribute to the global comparative feminist theologies. Let me now move on to strategy number 2, education about peace building. Churches, theological schools, and institutions of higher learning can include religion and peace building in their religious instruction and theological curriculum. The emergent field studying religion and peace building focuses on the themes of inter-religious dialogue, the retrieval of religious resources for peace building from different traditions, and the instrumental roles that religious actors and networks play in the dynamics of conflict and peace building. Then we need to understand what are the causes for women to be radicalized and join this extremist network. When I was doing research on this paper, I was very glad to see there has been increased research on women who joined this kind of violent groups and activities. They have looked at the macro level issues and also the psychology of these women by interviewing women in prisons. Through better understanding the motivation of women joining these extremist activities, preventive measures can be developed. Now, one of the tragedies of religiously motivated violence is that children and young people are being recruited in soldiers and as soldiers and perpetrators of violence. In Indonesia, as you know, teenagers and children have been involved in carrying out violent attacks. Therefore, the education and involvement of young people in peace building is very important because terrorist groups often target and recruit disenfranchised young people who feel alienation and anger because of their lack of education, employment, and opportunities. That is why we need to address young people's needs. Inter-religious dialogue among youth can promote mutual understanding and commitment to building relations and finding solutions together. Third, the increase of women's participation in violence must be placed in the wider context of communal religious violence and killings in recent Indonesian history. People of faith must help the society deal with the traumas and mourn the losses, as well as bear witness to life and healing. Saptami Nakawa calls attention to how memory, narratives of wounds and suffering, and witnesses of violence can contribute to the healing process. She says, traumas shatters lives and realities and ruptures faith claims and our sense of meaning. Christians are called to bear witness to the suffering that remains, even though much remains unknown and truth and explanation may not be fully available. She hopes that we will develop an hermeneutics of rupture, which reimagines and reconfigures sacred texts, symbols, and narratives from the complex relation of wounds and healings, instructs theology of praxis of life that persists and a love that remains in the abyss of the wounds. She also emphasized the use of art and performance in helping victims and the society to process wounds and to embark on a journey of healing. She practiced dance and taught her students and colleagues to do so as a way of addressing communal religious violence. We will need a new imagination in our collective social life in order to have sustained peace. I hope that religious traditions, as depositories of human wisdom across generations, can contribute to this new imagination. On the World Day of Peace in 2017, Pope Francis said, when victims of violence are able to resist the temptation to retaliate, they become the most credible promoters of nonviolence peace making. Sesi, and ask God to make us instrument of God's peace. Thank you very much.
And in the chat rooms, as you might know, we have 4 questions related to your presentation. Would you like to read them by yourself, or could I read for you?
Maybe you can read it if you don't mind.
Okay,
so you can
good,
read.
Yes. So thank you. So we have 4 questions in the chatting room. And after that, I will open another session for open discussion. And I would like to encourage all people here, colleagues, to open the mic to raise questions. So please, Professor Kwok, to answer some 4 questions from our colleagues. The first question comes from Pauline Lagunda, Ibu Pauline Lagunda from STT FDL. And the second one is from Irin Umbulolu from STT GKS. The third question from Ibu Seri, STT Nazaren. And the fourth question comes from Ibu Beni Sinaga. I'm sorry, Ibu. Ini adalah bias mitos nama ya. Saya pikir Beni selalu laki-laki, ternyata Beni juga perempuan. Professor Kwok, please take your time to answer the first 4 questions.
So can you read the first question?
Okay, good. The first question is from Pauline Lagunda. Based on your presentation, I have the impression that Abrahamic religion carry violent narratives which are then used to justify their beliefs. It's like a never-ending cycle of violence. So how do we anticipate reading this violent narrative with post-colonial eyes? That is the first question. Okay.
Maybe I just address this question first.
The second question.
Because these questions are very complex. Maybe I first address the first one, and then you can read the second one. So it might be easy. Yes. So the question talks about, is it true, or should we assume some of the religious traditions may have more violent elements? For example, the Abrahamic religions given that the different Abrahamic religions have been fighting or oppressing others for such a long time. Now, I want to emphasize, as I said in my presentation, they are often myths. That is, we have myths about especially religions that we do not know, or we do not know so well. Sometimes we assume some religions are inherently non-violent. Some, they are violent. But now, let me just start with Christianity, because in Christianity, we have the problems of Christianity has such a long association with colonization. Because, of course, the church went along. And then I belong to the Anglican Church. And of course, the Church of England spread to different parts of the world where the cross goes, Christianity follows. So you can see in our tradition, we also have problematic aspects. But then Jesus said, blessings and for the peacemakers. So within any tradition, you have elements that might be problematic. There are also elements that contribute to peace. And so together, we need to then lift up the elements that will contribute to sustained peace, whether it is in Islam, in Christianity, in Buddhist. And we can bring all these elements into critical dialogue and learning them so it becomes part of our shared spirituality. So I think this is very important. But I think there is also a discussion of whether monotheistic traditions may be more problematic in terms of contribution to peacekeeping. Why? Because in monotheistic religions, and you have one God, one church, one salvation, one, isn't it? That it can become exclusive. That is, either you convert to my tradition or you will not get the truth or salvation. Well, that is one aspect. But then in the Bible, there is also the claim the gospel does not belong to one person, one people, isn't it? It is not just for the Jews, and it is also for the Gentiles. And in the end, all nations and all peoples will be brought into God's kingdom. So I think it is important to recognize that we need to learn from each other and to lift up those elements that will contribute to peace. Instead of pointing fingers, it's your problem, not mine. My tradition is always liberating and emancipatory. I don't think any religious traditions can claim that we are innocent. We have no problems. Why? Because when we look at conflicts, it is not just religion that plays a role. Religion always intersects with race, with gender, with sexuality, with political power, economic power, isn't it? So when we look at it that way, we will see, let us, in interreligious dialogue, bring our humility to understand in what way we have contributed to harming others, and then learn from others what are some of the possibilities for building peace together. Thank you very much for this great question. So now you can read the second.
Yes, Professor Kwok. The second question comes from Ibu Irin Umbulolo from STTGKS. Thank you very much for your interesting presentation. Again, I learned much from your perspective. I have one question. How can we develop counter-imperial theological imagination as Christians to work for justice and peace in the context of religious pluralism. As you may know, in Indonesia, Christians are a minority group. Thank you. Here is the second question.
Yes. This is, again, a very important question because when we talk about our contributions to peacekeeping, we cannot neglect our own local context. For example, in the United States, Christianity is the dominant tradition. Some 70% of Americans would at least say they belong to the Christian tradition, whether it's Catholic or Protestant. But the situation is not in Indonesia. But I think it is also very important whether we are located in a Christian majority situation like the United States or Christian as minority situation in Indonesia, that we can develop the counter-imperial imagination. One very important thing to begin is to look at the Dutch colonial legacy. Because in post-colonial theology, much has been done concerning the British colonial experience. Because many people from India, from many other parts in Africa, have been colonized by the British Empire. So many theologians and biblical scholars since mid-1990s have worked on post-colonial criticism of the Bible, looking at how the Bible talks about empire and whether the Bible resists empire, and also look at the long history of the Christian tradition to see what aspects of Christian theology supported empire and what elements resist empire. And I have co-edited a book, Empire and the Christian Tradition, from Paul to contemporary times, to look at key theologians, whether they supported empire or they resist and subvert empire. And then very few have looked at the Dutch colonial experience, especially in Asia. And so I think Indonesian Christians can look at the legacy of the Dutch Empire and the introduction of Christianity to Indonesia, and how the bringing of Christianity to the country and leads maybe to competition, rivalry with the religious labors, and how that period might have sown some seeds or some legacies that we have to learn and critique so that we can build healthier understanding of Christianity today. Because we live in a globalized world, we need many perspectives. And so I hope some of colleagues who are joining us this morning and teaching in different schools or involved in different research can help us understand the long tradition of the Dutch rule and how it affects your understanding of Christianity in order to develop a counter imagination that is rooted in your local context. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Kwok, there is one comment from Reverend Adriana Baura from UKIT. We are very honored and proud when you mentioned Mariana Katoko, also Professor Nasaruddin Umar. There's a very great impression of your presentation. And the third question comes from Ibu Seri, STP Najaren, and the question is, thank you for the material that you have shared. One essential question from me, why statistically the radicalism suspect can come from the Muslim community, and why too easy for women to involve terrorism or to get involved terrorism or radicalism? Why not Christian women? Very interesting question.
Yes.
Please answer this.
Yes, I think that we have to look at a much longer history to understand what is happening and why the kind of religious violence changed shape in the last several decades. And we recall that there were religious violence and in Indonesia. We are talking about the 1960s and also the 1990s. So we cannot just separate what is happening today with a longer history against other religious minorities and ethnic minorities. And today, there is this revival of very conservative Muslim tradition and ideology in different parts of the world, not only in India, Indonesia, but also in Middle East. And then we have to ask, then we have to trace back. You ask why in Muslim tradition. Then you have to learn a longer history, what happened in the Middle East and in the encounter of colonization with the Muslim population in other parts of the world. Why there is this confrontation? Why there is a myth that future conflicts will be between the Christian civilizations and one will be the Islamic civilization. So it has a much longer history. And then longer, we can talk about the Crusade and a very long history, isn't it? And because of so, as I said, during the anti-colonial struggles, some of the Muslim majority countries, they emphasize the revival of Islam. And then because of globalization and neoliberal economic arrangements, and many people are searching for their own identity to resist the globalized forces. And one of the strategies is to emphasize your own tradition, to find out what is your root tradition. It is not only in the Middle East. Look at China. Isn't China always talk about the Chinese characteristics of socialism? And so for some time, China has revived Confucianism and its other indigenous traditions too, to undergird this so-called Chinese characteristic of socialist development. So you can see with globalization, there is one force. Then you have the resistance, which will be the fundamentalist movements from many parts of the world. And it is not limited to Islam. You have Jewish fundamentalist movement. Some of them become Zionists with a very rigid understanding. God has given them the land and because of God's covenant with the Jewish people. And then there are other Christian fundamentalists too. Some of you might have heard that some of the Christian fundamentalists, they are playing a very key role in American politics. Some of you have heard about what happened of the riot on January the 6th on American Capitol. Have you watched the news about that? And did you see some of them, they carried the cross or they said they were Christians. So it is not just we have fundamentalist movement within Islam. You have it in other traditions too. Because with globalization, with the neoliberal economy, many people, they did not reap the benefit. And so they were angry, they were alienated, and they needed something to ground themselves. Very narrow and fundamentalist religions sometimes met that needs. And so some of this fundamentalist movement, whether it is in Christianity, as in the January 6th movement, or in other religiously based violence, they had this kind of ideology that they want to revive the true religion. Some of the women participated, according to them, they wanted to participate to renew Islam, to bring the true Islam in the world, out of very idealistic claims, but then they used violent tactics. So I think to answer this question, I hope, number one, we look at this from a much longer historical perspective. Secondly, we cannot separate, oh, the Islam women, they may or may be more violent than the other religious women. No, we have to look at the social political reasons. And then, but most of all, I think joining these terrorist groups give them a sense of purpose and empowerment. That was the most important thing we have to learn from those studies. We thought that, you see, they were brainwashed, right? They could not make up their mind. They just blindly followed. No, they interviewed those women in prison and asked, why did you participate? Some, of course, brainwashed. But there were also other people who thought they are participating in a very just cause. And they are trying to bring true Islam in the world. And we have to listen to that so that we can come up with other religious narratives. And it is very important. Why? Because according to my research, many recommendations to address this problem, they are talking from a secular perspective. They have not developed a counter argument that will meet the needs of these women to seek empowerment. That is why I encourage religiously based scholars from Christianity, from Islam. We can share our notes. What have we found? What are the narratives that will empower women? So instead of joining the terrorist groups and committing violence, that they have a higher sense to bring peace, justice, and harmony, and human flourishing. So I hope my answer may not be directly what the person who asked wants. I do not think, and it is the decolonization of the mind leading me to see religion really cannot be separated from historical situation, social, political question. We really commit a fallacy when we just think some religion is inherently better than other religions. If we buy into that, can you see that? We cannot be peace builder. We will scapegoat people without understanding. Are there reasons why people do that? We tend to forget there has been a long history of confrontation between Muslims and Christianity, dated back to centuries ago. Without knowing this long history, how can we just answer the question, why in the last 2 decades, with ISIS infiltrating many of those terrorist groups in Asia, that now suddenly we have Asian women participating in those violent acts.
All right. Professor Kwok, we have 5 more questions besides the question that will be raised directly by open mic. Can I read 2 or 3 questions and you can answer all questions at the same time?
Okay,
okay, good. Okay, another question from Ibu Beni Sinaga. As Christian, I'm thinking there might be some teaching in the church and cause women to get involved in doing violence and radical movement. Do you find some teachings, doctrines, or Bible texts that supported women to do radical movements? This is in the future, we need to be aware and give a new interpretation from peace perspective, and as theologians need to be repented. Okay, that's from Ibu Beni. The next question from John Simon, John Simon. Paul Rigaud once says, symbols give rise to meaning. In discussion with fellow lecturers, where I also teach at the Al-Udin State Islamic University in Makassar, information was obtained that one of the factors behind the acts of radicalism and terrorism is a frequent occurrence of religious figures, especially in Islam, who are depicted using swords and weapons. Through this picture, there is an internalization of violence. even among young people. These figures are used as idols who are used as patrons to carry out various acts of extremist terrorism. What do you think about the internalization of these religious symbols? Should we bring up a counter ideology with new symbols against radicalism, terrorism? Thank you, Professor Kwok. The next question from Danang, STAKBW, Party. Radical imagination is imagination of resistance to dominant power, colonialism, capitalism, and theology. So the spirit of radicals is not always totally negative. We can find the traces of spirit of liberation, but in other side, this imagination also could be having negative aspects, like as legitimation of for stability of dominant power or status quo. Do we have an alternative or strategy for making like radical peace? How does the feminist theology contribute to a model feminist peace theology in radicalism and religion issue? Thanks. There is three consecutive questions. Very interesting. Please, Professor Kwok.
Yes, right. Thank you very much. I think that let me just briefly highlight some of them, the possible directions. And I think the first question is very interesting. That is, what about whether we have those traditions in Christianity that would encourage women to do this violent act? Now, I think let us do not sanitize the Bible. The Bible has many violent tales, isn't it? The conquest of Canaan, many wars, okay? Whereas sometimes women were caught in those contact zones, okay? But then there are also women who might be leaders and then involved in some of those activities. And so I think to talk about the Bible as completely peacekeeping, I think we put the Bible in two compressed in Jesus' movement. Did you recall there was a disciple who cut the servant's ear? And so that is, there were people that saw us among Jesus' followers. So I think the situation may be more complex, but I think it is important to also recognize because so we did not have very active role talking about women in combat, women in other violence. We have houses, have women. It was a very small religious community under the oppression of the Roman Empire. And that is why I think when we look at the Bible and we pay attention to those peaceful or teachings about peace, and we also recognize temptations to violence, war, rape, and some women may be leaders and of their communities, and some women, they may be involved in some of the activities that we would not be very pleased with. And that is why I think the Bible is a very interesting book. It did not give us a romanticized, idealized human communities. That is why through this post-colonial lens, we can look at the Bible and it's all complexities, showing us how a small nation, and then divided into two, of course, and then meet with the challenges of surrounded by big empire. The situation sometimes is quite similar to some of the smaller nations in Asia today. Would you think so? And so we have much to learn regarding peacekeeping and regarding in what way we can contribute to peacekeeping as men and as women. And I think it is very important to talk about peace building and peacekeeping as a practice. Why do I say so? Because one of the questions talk about how can we then build training and teaching about peace. If war and violence is learned, peace building must be learned too. I do not know whether in Indonesia you include courses on conflict resolution, reconciliation in your theological curriculum, because I have several colleagues at Kendall School of Theology who are teaching courses on religion and conflict resolution. Because we need to train leaders in faith communities or in our public arenas how to resolve conflict, how to bring people of diverse religious and political perspectives together so that we can have dialogue. And those conversations are very difficult, isn't it? Those of us who have been involved find that very difficult and challenging. So we have to learn how to do that and not just assume we as Christians and loving God and go to the church, then we know, no, those are skills to be learned. So I hope in a theological education or in higher education, we include those dimensions. How do you deal with conflict? Whether it's in your congregation or in the larger society. So I think to promote that will be very important as well. And I hope also that we draw from also our spiritual and religious resources from local cultures. I am particularly intrigued by some of the Christian feminist theologians in Indonesia who draw from indigenous cosmology, indigenous understanding of human relations, including men and women's relations, to build their feminist theology. So I think there's a lot that Indonesian colleagues can offer to the wider conversation. And also you have a religiously diverse country, and you have tried different ways politically, isn't it, since independence, to then bring different groups together. And it will be very helpful for us outside to learn what kind of strategies work. How have religiously motivated people contribute to that effort? What are the lessons that you have learned? And so to inspire people from different parts of the world to understand your success and your failures. I think that will be also very important.
Thank you, Professor Kwok. We have many questions, and I would like to read all of questions. Besides, because of the time, very limited time, then I will read all, and please respond all questions because our time is very limited. So we'll have about 7 minutes left, and there is colleagues that want to raise questions directly. But for now, I will read all questions. The next question from Mary Rungkat, UKSW. My question is how the strategy of the government, religion and community to work together to solve radicalism, especially the preparators of radicalism has involved women. And the next question from Yeremia Yorgani from STT Amanat Agung. It's true that we need to build interreligious relations to seek peace in Indonesia, but my question, how can the uniquely Christian view of shalom color the interreligious relationship in building that peace? That's the second question. The next one from Pak Marudur, STT HKBP. why recently women are involved in the extremism and radicalism and even as ISIS soldiers? Do you think it is a success of feminism or a bad influence of it? It's very interesting. And how do you respond if Christian women say that you need to tell all the peace building teachings and training to Muslim women, for they are the ones to radicalism, extremism, and suicide bombing, not us? This can be heard in our context of Indonesia. This another question from Solis Katori, Unera. I would like to say, well, it's not question, I think, but okay, I will read it. I would like to say about Halmahera is a former social conflict area, but what's interesting that in situation of radicalism, which is very rampant in various places, but Halmahera is very difficult for radicalism actors to enter and survive because of the principle of sister brotherhood had by community. Okay, there is sharing. And from Pak Erik Barus, STT Medan, I'm not agreed to say woman as leader for suicide bombers. Women always should include children by radicalist group. We need research furthermore about that. Salafism, Wahhabism, and Ikhwanul Muslim are involved communities to Asia and Indonesia. So I suggest to Persetia, if you would like to rule, the role of women to build peace in Indonesia, young women, theologian of Indonesia should have scholars group which they have studied in Islam environment. In Egypt, to example, we have group Islam theologian and so on. Okay, good. And the last from Ronald Hevelderi, discourses and activities in the religion area, theological fields and practices connecting to the radicalism in Indonesia is a must and crucial. We have to share in the interfaith milieu to develop our share movement in terms to eliminate the bias of the theological religiosism. But in our real problem, weakness of the law enforcement and political will that being within the authority of our government and political society. We must do more in this area. I see that this movement is going on in the legislative board. In this case, many social associations have been participate in the struggle to eliminate religious radicalism in around the world and Indonesia. How are you seeing this situation? Thank you very much, Professor Kwok. There's all questions I read, please, in the limited time. And I would like to ask Ibu Lenta, please give us a longer time, maybe 5 more minutes, so that Professor Kwok can answer all questions within 7 or 8 minutes.
Thank you very much.
5 more minutes, please. Yes, thank you.
And I want to thank all those who have posted these very challenging and inspiring questions. And I'm glad to know this is only the first session. You still have different sessions with people who are very knowledgeable about the Indonesian context to answer some of the questions. And there will be a Muslim perspective, I understand, and also a Christian perspective following. And you will also include theological educators for their perspective on how to then include peace building in the life of the community and also in religious instruction. Now, after hearing all these questions on concerns, let me just pick up a few because time is limited. I cannot go through all this. I want to address the question whether is it feminism that prompts some Muslim women to join the terrorist groups. Now then, this is a highly interesting question. We have then to come to understand why women cannot pursue empowerment otherwise. Isn't it? Are there other alternatives? We are not talking about many, we understand. But why some will be attracted, even die for that cause? And that is why we as religious-based feminists, needs to ask, what are the other opportunities, not only in terms of our religious beliefs, but in terms of the societal change, isn't it? If patriarchy is prevalent, if opportunities are not available, if someone here that it is by dying, not living, that I can claim to be a truly liberated woman, it's not by living, by dying. Now I want us all to hear the desperate need of that seeking. And without understanding, to have some empathy, we cannot change our minds. We only will label that is problem maker. But we wash our hands because the majority of us did not much to change these women's circumstances, isn't it? So when something like that happens, I think it is a collective metanoia conversion. It is not just blaming those people. Let us see what kind of world and society we have created that prompted these women to seek fulfillment in such a way. Not only that, bringing their children. Isn't this a tragic situation? A collective metanoia will ask, what is the true women's emancipation? What has the churches done? What did the larger society do? Where are the women's organizations? Who are the religious neighbors in situations like this? Well, that is a big question for all of us. Then we are not just pointing fingers, but collectively, whether we are Buddhists or Christians or Muslims, we have to find in what way we help to sustain a situation like this. And from that unraveling of our own complicity in supporting patriarchy in our church, in our family, in our society, then with this collective awareness, and we may hopefully begin with our own community. If we are teachers, we begin with teaching students. And I am so impressed that President Nakawa taught, encouraged the students and colleagues to learn dancing in an embodied way, and together to find in what way we can embody a true spirituality of peace. We start from our own body. Now, all of us needs to do something, isn't it? And not just label this are only a few people. It, yes, creates troubles, but it did not affect me. Maybe I do not live in that neighborhood. A decolonization of the mind is to see power in its nakedness. Not only that is other people who hold power. Asking if I am in a position of power. For example, I'm a teacher, or I am a principal of a school, or I am the reverend so-and-so as a leader. Have I used the power entrusted to me to address some of those societal pressures? Very often, the tragedy is not we have done something. It is what we have not done. Or in situations, we remained silent. So peacekeeping means really a decolonizing of the body, decolonizing of the mind, and decolonizing the spirit, so that together we feel the woundedness And Christianity, remember, suffering, isn't it? And then the cross is really talking about woundedness and suffering. And how, out of this encounter with the cross, suffering, the tragic situation of having children committing violent crimes, whether by themselves or coerced in their situations, we do not fully understand how we can talk about reconciliation. But President Nagawa said to bear witness of the woundings and the violence. It's not just one or two tragic incidents, but the wounding of the country. And Indonesia has a long history of mass killings and religiously motivated violence. Let us remember that unless we change our mind, change our way of looking at the situation through a much broader socio-economic perspective, we will only label only a few troublemakers bombing up themselves. They were the silly ones, and we are the fortunate ones. We bear the pain together, and because of that, we work together for peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Profesor Kwok. Thank you very much. Ibu Bapak, kita butuh banyak waktu ternyata ya. 1,5 jam tidak cukup karena ada banyak pertanyaan. Tapi jangan khawatir, setelah ini masih ada 2 presentasi yang disampaikan oleh pemikir dan teolog dari Indonesia. Jadi jangan khawatir. Tapi untuk menutup sesi yang pertama ini, kita mengucapkan terima kasih kepada Profesor Kwok Pui Lan. So thank you very much for your presentation, Profesor Kwok.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Oke, terima kasih. Dan yang kedua, saya ingin menandaskan bahwa untuk membangun peacebuilding dengan memakai lensa postkolonial sangat amat penting untuk melakukan demitologisasi terhadap 3 hal yang sudah dikemukakan tadi, yaitu mitos tentang clash of civilization, mitos tentang sekularisme itu selalu berkaitan dengan kebaikan, perkembangan, sedangkan agama dianggap irasional dan absolutis, dan mitos yang ketiga berkaitan dengan labelisasi agama yang di satu dianggap sebagai yang peaceful, yang lain dianggap berkaitan dengan violence and jihadism. Dan Profesor Kwok juga menekankan pentingnya bekerja sama dan jejaring dialog dan pendidikan masyarakat. Saya rasa apa yang dikemukakan Profesor Kwok tidak hanya membuka horizon pemahaman kita, tapi juga menambahkan beban yang lebih berat lagi untuk secara fundamental dan juga faktual bekerja di tengah-tengah bangsa masyarakat kita dalam olah peacebuilding atau menghadirkan kedamaian di Indonesia. Biasanya saya ketua Persetia adalah bos dari Persetia, tapi dalam hal ini bos saya adalah Ibu Lenta yang adalah dilat Persetia, jadi saya harus mematuhi dia. Ibu Lenta, terima kasih, saya kembalikan puji hormat dan waktu kepada Ibu Lenta. Jangan capek-capek, tetap sehat dan tetap semangat. Ibu Lenta saya berikan, so thank you very much, Professor Kwok. We'll meet again in another time and opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Ibu Lenta, terima kasih.
Terima kasih Pak Yusak. Thank you, Professor Kwok.
Thank
Good
you.
night. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. I will email you soon.